Hello there, and welcome to episode 17 of the Unqualified Opinion Sports Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Marco Yerkovich. We have a lot of great stuff to get to, as it was a very busy week in the sports world. On today's episode, we will be discussing the coaching changes around the NFL, more potential NBA trades, our college basketball title contenders, our college football national championship preview, and much, much more. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave your own unqualified opinions in the comments section down below. Also, don't forget to check us out on Spotify. The link for that is in the description below. With that down and out of the way, let's welcome in Tim Seipel to the podcast.
How we doing? What's grooving?
All right, so the first thing on the agenda here, we're going to discuss Wild Card Weekend. It was a crazy weekend in the NFL, what that all means. So first up, Tim, what was your biggest surprise from the weekend?
I sure hope this was everybody's biggest surprise from Wild Card Weekend, because I don't know if who called it, but I sure as heck did. The Vikings beating a Saints team that looked unbeatable towards the end of the season. The Saints looked like the team to beat towards the end of the season, and they weren't even ranked in the top two seeds, which is kind of insane to think about. But the Vikings took it to them. They've got Dalvin Cook back. The defense played its best game of the season easily against a Drew Brees and Michael Thomas that have been hitting on all notes throughout the whole season, as Michael Thomas clearly has the record for most catches in a season and has looked fantastic. And the Vikings defense just shut them down and prepared so well leading up to the game.
Well, to be fair, it may have been very unfortunate for a lot of people that the Saints lost. But, I mean, we did tell the people, did we not, Tim? When we all picked the Saints, we said, put money on the Vikings. If you listened, you had a big payout. That just goes to show when we all agree about something, you know what? Go the complete opposite of us. When we have the DeHaan curses or the clean sweeps, run away from us as quickly as possible.
There's a reason why we are unqualified.
Right. That's, they are opinions. So speaking of things that are just terrible and you need to get away from as soon as possible, Tim, what is your biggest disappointment of Wild Card Weekend?
Now, this may not sound it kind of focusing on the same game, but I've got to say, like, Drew Brees and the Saints, they came out flat. They didn't get the job done when they needed to. They had little spurts throughout the game, but they weren't able to produce significantly like they have been in the past, and they just came out like they weren't ready to play. They came out as if it was an easy game, as if they had it in the bag, which it looked like they did, because, I mean, the Vikings lost to my very own Packers earlier 2 weeks ago, I believe. But with that being said, I just don't see how this happened. I don't see how the Saints didn't prepare as well enough, and towards the end of the game, it just looked like Drew Brees was hucking up the ball to whoever could catch it, as the defense was doing so good for the Vikings. I mean, there was a point where he threw an interception into double coverage, and Drew Brees did not look like Drew Brees, and neither did Michael Thomas. Yeah,
that's a great point. We had some establishment teams that have been great like that throughout the years. The Saints and the Patriots, especially over Wild Card Weekend, just did not look like themselves, did not play well. But so talking about these teams that played well over Wild Card Weekend, do you think that these teams, especially teams we did not expect to win, those 6 seeds, the Vikings especially, do you think those guys carrying in momentum from Wild Card Weekend, do you think that's better, or do you think it's better for these teams like San Francisco and the other top seeds to have a bye?
Honestly, in the Vikings' sake, in the Vikings situation, I think that they really needed the momentum to get back on track in the wild card, and it kind of reassure their confidence in themselves, because I believe they've lost a lot of confidence throughout the season, and this past game they gained it all back, beating the best team in the NFC as it was looking down towards the wire in the season. But, it really depends on a team. For a team that looked flat towards the end of the season, it is helpful to have a game to get back on track like the Vikings did. But for a team that's been performing at a high level throughout, the bye is helpful to recover and prepare, as you have 2 weeks, which you can't go wrong with 2 weeks. But the Saints obviously did not prepare very well in 1 week, and it really showed. So I think it's really situational. But especially for the Vikings, it's going to be more helpful than having a bye.
All right, so again, talking about the teams that won on Wildcard Weekend, in the AFC, it was Tennessee and Houston, and in the NFC, it was Minnesota and Seattle. So from those four teams, who do you think is the best remaining? Not necessarily the team that you think can win the Super Bowl, just based on their path or whatever, but of those four teams, who do you think is the best team overall remaining from those four?
I feel like I'm talking about the Vikings a lot, and that's an issue because I'm a Packers fan, but the Vikings looked the best because they played the best opponent. I mean, the Texans didn't look fantastic against the Bills. Obviously, the Bills' defense is really good, but they just didn't look like themselves, and they were able to push through. But, I mean, even if you go to Seattle, too, Seattle is injury-ridden. I don't see them winning a game outside of Wildcard Week because they just don't have the personnel that they usually do. And the Vikings, I think they have the best chance to be an upset this next week because not only do they have momentum like we talked about, but Cook is back, the defense is playing their best ball, and Cousins is just doing just enough to get through games, and who knows whether that will keep up. But I'd keep an eye on the Vikings for sure as they look like the best team coming out of Wildcard Weekend.
All right, so with that, yeah, there's a lot of storylines heading into the NFL divisional round. So we're actually going to take a step back from that and look at the other end of the spectrum. These are all teams that did not make the playoffs and all teams that have been pretty pitiful for not only this season, but for a long time. We're going to look at all the head coaching changes from around the league. First up, the Dallas Cowboys did not retain Jason Garrett. He himself is looking to potentially be the new offensive coordinator for the New York Giants. The Cowboys instead went with a guy who won a Super Bowl and coached 13 seasons with the Green Bay Packers, Mike McCarthy. Tim, your thoughts on this?
I've got nothing against Mike McCarthy. I think he's a good coach. And, who knows how this will play out. And that's the biggest thing to keep in mind. We don't know for sure how things are going to play out. He definitely is put in the best position to succeed as they have a defense and an offense that is about as versatile as it gets, especially for a team that just fired their coach. But it feels as if the Cowboys settled. It feels as if the Cowboys could have gone for maybe somebody that would have done much better in our minds coming into this week. I love that Mike McCarthy is keeping Kellen Moore as the offensive coordinator. I think that's a fantastic move and a good way to start off on track. But I still feel as if the Cowboys could have done better. But it'll be interesting to see whether or not Mike McCarthy is up for the job.
Well, I know we had talked about for plenty of weeks. We knew that the Ginger Clapper was out in Dallas. Jerry Jones was just dragging this out, whether it's for some ego thing or whatever, something we don't know. During that time, we had talked about that really there were two candidates, big enough for the brand and big enough to handle the expectations and the significant amount of talent on this team. I mean, this Cowboys team has a lot of talent. Top 5 team in terms of talent around on the offense and defensive side of the ball. We said that Lincoln Riley and Urban Meyer were the two guys that we thought could handle this job the best and, had the name recognition and the coaching ability. But I think if there was a short list of guys that were not those top 2 guys, but guys that really could handle this job well, Mike McCarthy is one of them. Again, won a Super Bowl, had way above a winning record with the Green Bay Packers, and was really only let go because of disagreements with Aaron Rodgers. And I understand that maybe the Packers weren't achieving to what they needed to, but Mike McCarthy is a very solid head coach. I think the Cowboys, it's too early to call whether they can be a playoff contender, a Super Bowl contender, but I just think just on the basis of this hire, this was a really good decision by by the Dallas Cowboys to get the former Packers head coach. Speaking of not the best decisions, the New York Giants, and I feel bad for possibly bagging on this guy, but the New York Giants and Dave Gettleman, the most incompetent general manager in the league, let's just call it as it is. Joe Judge, the New England Patriots special teams coordinator and wide receivers coach, is now the head coach of the New York Giants. There's not a whole lot to be said other than it's a gamble. It is a gamble. the last coach to be hired directly from special teams coordinator to head coach is John Harbaugh, and there's plenty of guys that had special teams experience. Bill Cowher, Bill Belichick, Marv Levy, a lot of guys, Mike Ditka. So it's not like this is unheard of in the league, but it's a bit of a gamble. Joe Judge has been with the Patriots for 8 years as the special teams coordinator, won 3 Super Bowls. Before that, was at Alabama in the same position, won 2 BCS national championships under Nick Saban. So it's not like he hasn't been under the tutelage of some very impressive coaches, but just it seems like a bit of a long shot, a desperate shot, especially for someone of the brand of the Giants and from the media market of New York. Tim, do you have any other additional thoughts on this hire?
I don't know about you, but this came out of nowhere for me. I didn't know who the heck this guy was, but obviously there is a reputation that coaches coming off of the Belichick coaching tree have. But if we look at Joe Judge, he has very little coaching experience outside of special teams and really just outside of Alabama and New England, which obviously those are 2 very prestigious positions, as they're probably one of the most successful football teams in the NFL and one of the most successful football teams in the college realm. But it seems kind of out of nowhere. It seems like a shot in the dark. Could be a home run. Honestly, if this is a home run, Gettleman will look like the smartest man on earth. He will look brilliant. But if this is a bust, not totally sure how that's going to go down with the owner. I don't know how much time Gettleman has. I think we all agree that he's one of the most incompetent GMs, if not the most incompetent GM in the NFL. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. I'll definitely be watching this, but I just don't see much from this.
Yeah, as you touched on it, just seems like it came out of nowhere. If you were going to hire a coordinator from the Patriots, I think Josh McDaniels would have been the guy. I don't know if teams are maybe a little careful with McDaniels after he burned the Colts 2 years ago, but still, I mean, really, Joe Judge was probably only going to be in line to get the offensive coordinator position with the Patriots if Josh McDaniels went to Cleveland or New York or to Carolina. So Joe Judge, I mean, again, experienced guy, has worked with Belichick a lot and with Saban for a few years. So it's too early to judge Joe Judge, but sorry for the pun, but this seems really out of the blue. It's not like a lot of other guys were going for the Giants. And speaking of the other guy the Giants were trying to go after, but lost to and seemed to put them in this panic, Matt Rule, the Baylor head coach, who took them to the Big 12 championship game and the Sugar Bowl, is now the head coach of the Carolina Panthers. Your overall thoughts on this hire?
I'm not totally sure about Matt Rule. He will be set up to succeed with a team that has performed well at times. I mean, having Cam Newton out has definitely hurt them, and with him injured, it's definitely hurt them. But I believe that he's in a good spot, but we know that he doesn't have much coaching experience. I mean, he's coached for Temple and Baylor as a head coach. He's coached at other places, other smaller colleges as maybe positional coaches, but he doesn't have a lot of experience. He turned around the Baylor program rather fast, but it just doesn't line up for me saying that he's going to be successful as an NFL coach.
For me, I mean, he is a program builder. He turned around Temple in 4 years and Baylor. I mean, we thought that program was going to the dogs after how Art Briles left it in absolute shambles. But Matt Rule turned that around in 3 years. And I'm not saying that he doesn't necessarily deserve this coaching position, but I think Carolina could have looked elsewhere. Josh McDaniels, Eric Bieniemy. There's other guys out there that not necessarily were more deserving, but more proven in the NFL realm. I think Matt Rule, it's not that he's gotten lucky. Again, he's very clearly proven that he can build a program, but the NFL is a different beast, and I don't know. We could be looking stupid here in a few years, and he could be taking this team back to their Super Bowl contending time as they were a few years ago under Ron Rivera. But I think that this is a bit of a gamble. Tim, your thoughts on what this hire means for Cam Newton? Do you think that this means it's more or less likely that Cam Newton will be the starting quarterback for the Panthers next season?
It's hard to say, as this is a fresh start. This is the first coaching change for Cam Newton in the NFL, and so it'll definitely be a different experience. There's going to be more competition at the quarterback level. He's going to have to compete, but maybe that's what he needs. Maybe he needs a little push, maybe a little shove in the right direction. And I very well can see Cam Newton come out of this and performing at a high level next year with the Panthers. I would not be shocked. But, it's really hard to tell. And I think that's a common trend, especially with coaching changes. It's just you can't tell for sure. But I think Cam Newton deserves a shot to prove himself, as he's performed at high levels before, but injuries have just brought him down. It'll be interesting to see what Matt Rule decides coming down towards the beginning of the season.
Yeah, that's really interesting because about where the Panthers land in the draft, Justin Herbert could still be there. Tua Tagovailoa could still be there. There's other guys they can go after, or they can continue to build their defense. There's a lot of things they can do whether or not they decide to bring back Cam Newton. Speaking of his former coach, Ron Rivera, hired by Washington. Cannot believe this, but for sure outside of the McCarthy hire, the most competent move in the offseason as coaching hires go was done by Washington. I mean, that's very surprising. I cannot for the life of me understand why Ron Rivera would choose this job. I assume he was probably offered some of these other jobs from around the league and could have gone back to being a very good defensive coordinator as he was before he got the Panthers job. So your thoughts on this hire by Washington and Ron Rivera's choice to pick this team?
This is the best coaching hire the Redskins could have hoped for. Ron Rivera has already set the tone in the locker room by removing ping pong tables, shuffleboard games. And the fact that was in the locker room is kind of appalling that was allowed. But, the Redskins have potential, and Rivera is the coach to bring it out. I personally believe this is a great move, which I don't know if anybody will say otherwise. But I do think Rivera could have probably done better. But you obviously see something in the Redskins. They have a promising rookie draft this past year, and Terry McLaurin is just unlocking part of his potential and how well he'll do. I think he's going to be a fantastic wide receiver. And Dwayne Haskins, this is the best case scenario for him, getting Ron Rivera as his head coach and hopefully maybe another year off to really learn more about the system and grow in that way. I don't think we can expect immediate change, but there will be growth year by year. And I think this will be a look back as one of the smartest moves this year.
So speaking of smart moves, the Cleveland Browns are not necessarily known for that. Cleveland let go of general manager John Dorsey. They don't have a general manager right now, but Jimmy Haslam, the owner, says that Cleveland's going to pick a head coach before they pick a general manager. And guess what? We're a few months away from the draft. The combine is getting near. They not only don't have a head coach, they don't have a general manager. So what is Cleveland doing? I mean, obviously, there's not a whole lot of panic, actually, because there's still a lot of guys out there that they can get. Josh McDaniels, Eric Bieniemy, Stefanski from the Vikings. There's a lot of guys. They're interviewing Jim Schwartz from the Eagles right now. So your thoughts on this whole Brown situation, who they could get for both head coach and general manager. I also have to preface this with saying we're recording this on Wednesday afternoon. So if they announce it before you're hearing this, then sorry, but hopefully we predict the future. Tim, your thoughts on this?
So I think they're actually doing a good job by not rushing anything. I think that's something that they've done before. And with the playoffs still going on, you mentioned Kevin Stefanski, Eric Bieniemy. Those guys are still coaching their teams in the playoffs. So maybe when they get eliminated and maybe interviewed by the Browns, maybe that will make things more clear for them. And I like that they're taking their time more. I think it helps that they don't have a GM right now. But I honestly only see this coming down to two guys, Josh McDaniels or Urban Meyer. I can't imagine the Browns passing up on any of these guys, as these are probably the two best options for the Browns, who, like you said, have waited a good amount of time. They need more maturity at the coaching position and really someone to set the tone for the team. They have one of the, probably, I'd put them maybe second or third best team as potential that needed another coaching hire, right by the Panthers and the Cowboys. But this is a promising team. I understand Baker Mayfield did not have a great year, but there were a lot of dysfunctional things going on, and I expect him to bounce back even better. But McDaniels or Urban Meyer would really help with setting the tone. I like Meyer more for this position, but time will tell. It really will come down to what they really want to do with their future, and if they really want to go for the big fish like Urban Meyer or Josh McDaniels.
Hey, what about Lincoln Riley, his old college coach that really knows him and knows how to build an offense around him? And Lincoln Riley has proven, I mean, he's gotten Oklahoma to the playoffs 4 consecutive years. So I think Lincoln Riley's a legitimate contender for this job as well.
Very possible, yeah. I mean, he's a legitimate contender. I just like these guys a little bit more because they're not held down as much. I think Lincoln Riley is having hesitations about going to the NFL and maybe even going to the Browns. Obviously, he has repertoire with Baker Mayfield, but I think it will be interesting to see how he reacts. I don't know if he quite wants to get to the NFL yet. I think he has a couple great years still ahead of him at Oklahoma. And as Urban Meyer's been out for a while, I'm sure he's just scratching to get back into the game.
All right, so those are some great points on that Browns job and all those head coaching hires. Solid discussion there about, are these teams rushing? I mean, Matt Rule was hired a day after his interview by the Panthers. The Giants then rushing and getting Joe Judge. McCarthy and the Cowboys probably had been lining up for a while. The Rivera hire solid by Washington. Browns are still out there, but they have a lot of options, as Tim and I just discussed. So with that, we're going to say goodbye to Tim for his portion of the podcast.
Goodbye, guys.
All right, so with that, we're going to welcome in Will Byerman to the podcast.
Hey, everybody.
All right, so we're going to go straight into some NBA topics now. So, Will, over the past few weeks, we've been talking a lot about trades as the trade deadline and All-Star Weekend slowly creeping up on us. So you've got a few trades for us, and you did individual players this time. So let me hear a few trades you have right now for Andre Drummond.
Andre Drummond really is, aside from Kevin Love, who we've sworn him off for a little bit. Drummond's going to be the big guy. And the interesting thing to see is where does he fit in the modern NBA? He can't really shoot. He can kind of shoot free throws at times. He can kind of handle sometimes. But he is your old school center still. He's going to provide a lot of rebounding, a lot of size on the perimeter. Great defensive player. Can really discount offense sometimes. But there's 2 to 3 teams I have. We have got 3 teams here who I think could still use his service. One, and this one's kind of a dark horse, Dallas Mavericks have been linked to him a lot. I really don't see that happening. For one, I think at the end of the day, center there is not something they feel like they need it as much as they need another player on offense to take some of the burden off Luka Doncic. But if they did want to get Drummond, get some more size, get some rebounding, I think Dwight Powell and a first-round pick would probably be about what it would take to get them to get Drummond over from the Pistons. Powell, terrific bench player at the forward and center position, but not exactly the offensive option. And then obviously first-round pick, or more likely the Warriors' second-round pick, which is essentially a first at this point, would probably be what they need to move the needle there. For the Atlanta Hawks, Andre Drummond, probably require a package of Alex Len, Chandler Parsons, and a first-round pick. Len having a quiet little bounce-back season, playing pretty well. Chandler Parsons is just kind of in there for the salary cap. Drummond's got a big contract. Parsons has a ridiculous bloated albatross of a contract. And then, of course, first-round pick, because the Pistons really should be in asset accumulation mode at this point in time. Sekou Doumbouya and Luke Kennard are looking like pretty solid prospects. It's time to get some help around them. Drummond, a little too old for that time frame. First-round pick would help, though. And then the Hornets also are increasingly confident in their ability to be a contending team for the playoffs. And so I've heard them say they think Drummond could possibly be the answer there, either alone or alongside Cody Zeller, who's provided some pretty solid minutes for the past couple seasons, the power forward center combo. In this situation, I thought they'd want to stick with Zeller. He's got a little outside shooting. He's a good screen setter. So I think they want to keep him around. So I had them send over some picks. Bismack Biyombo, plays a lot like Drummond, just not as good. He's having a nice little bounce back of his own. And then Malik Monk, too, who's looked great at sometimes former lottery pick, but he's not really there yet. So I think those are the three of the more likely trade options we could see for Andre Drummond.
So if what we're seeing here is pretty true, and you have reflected most of the teams that have shown interest, it's not great. It's not great for the Pistons, as we'll get to later. Blake,
it really isn't. Boston, I don't see making a move for him. People have talked about how they want that to happen. I think they're fine with Tice. But Boston's one of the only teams I think could give a really outstanding package of players for Drummond. But at the end of the day, with Drummond, as good as he is, borderline all-star, he's not so unique of a talent and unique of a player that he's going to have a massive market that's going to demand those high-quality picks, or
especially as a center.
That you want.
Yeah, especially as a center. I think the Hawks is probably his most likely destination. They've really been pushing for it, which is kind of strange given their timeline. We thought that they would maybe try and be able to make the playoffs this year, accumulate another mid-round pick, and then really push for it the following year as they develop Trae Young, Kevin Huerter, and John Collins. But apparently, they're ready to go now, despite having the worst record in the league. This is very strange, but I think if
I can add a bit onto that, Trae Young has been growing more and more frustrated with the organization. Apparently, kind of had a famous little mini meltdown at the end of a game. And so they're really trying to, show him that they're going to take care of him as a star. And two, I think it's a good move for them. They don't have a lot to lose, because if they bring in Drummond and he sucks, he's a free agent at the end of the year, they still get that draft pick. But the Hawks, they have Huerter, they have Cam Reddish, John Collins, Young, obviously, DeAndre Young, too. I mean, they have so many, or DeAndre Hunter, they have so many good players, young players. I think they're kind of full there. What they really need is a guy like Drummond, who's been around a locker room for a long time and has good experience. And I think it's time for them to get some quality veterans. I think the Hawks are closer to playoff contention than we all think.
Yeah, so, I think you're right about that. And the John Collins suspension did not help their record at all. He's a really big part of what they do. So I think the Hawks, this is the right move for them. They're just going to have to push hard. Again, as you said, this will not be a highly competitive trade market for Andre Drummond, but they'll just have to be careful with how much of their young core they give up. All right, so next up you have some trade options for Andre Iguodala.
So two teams on the script, one more kind of floating around in my head, because the Lakers would have to move mountains with a third team to make this happen. I know they're the number one team that wants him. I think that's pretty unlikely given the assets they had. Like you and me talked about last week, there's not many teams that are so terrible they're willing to eat a ton of dead salary to help like a team like the Lakers or Clippers acquire a player. So I don't think I don't think we're going to see many multi-team deals for the most part. So I picked Rockets, who apparently, according to ESPN, desperately want Iguodala, and then Clippers. Now Rockets kind of drive me nuts to a degree in that they're obsessed with this quick fix they think is out there. In their own minds, they're perennially ready for one more guy to show up and just take over the whole organization. I think they're farther away than that, but they're going to push for Iguodala anyway. So, most thing I can come up with is a package of draft picks, then assorted young talent for the Grizzlies: Ben McLemore, Chris Clemens, Gary Clark. McLemore had a brief Grizzlies stint, and Clark and Clemens have shown some promise. The Grizzlies are a good organization at taking young guys like Grayson Allen, Bruno Caboclo, who are kind of overstayed their welcome in other places, and making them productive role players. I think that they're really, at this point, probably ready to accept assorted spare parts for Iguodala just to get a couple draft picks, get them off the books. So I think that assortment of younger wings could be in the cards for the Rockets. And then if it was the Clippers, they're the interesting one. Iguodala's still a big need for them.
Well, that Clippers one probably can't happen the way you've constructed it, just because Landry Shamit's only on a rookie deal. Jerome Robinson, his deal's only $3 million, and Iguodala's expiring contract is $17 million. So what you have right there, and then plus probably a second round pick, is solid, but they're also probably going to have to throw in Mo Harkless, which means they can probably take Shamit or Robinson, one of the two, out of the deal. So what it's probably going to need to be, and I think, as you said, the Clippers are probably the most likely destination because they have the assets, is a second-round pick, either Landry Shamet or Jerome Robinson, plus Mo Harkless to match salary because he's got $11 million on an expiring deal.
Harkless or some combination of, I forgot the other wing to have. Harkless was supposed to be on that. I don't think they got him. I think, honestly, though, I think you do need Shamet and Robinson. Harkless is solid, but it's a pretty low upside wing at this point.
I don't think the Clippers are going to part ways with Landry Shamet just to get Andre Iguodala here at the end of the season, especially if they're putting in picks. Well, you could say either alternate picks or Landry Shamet, but I don't think they're giving up both of those.
Shamet has not really been the player that we all hoped he would be this season, which I don't think he's done by any means, but I think we kind of assumed he was ready to go because of what he did last year for the Clippers. He hasn't looked as solid for this Clippers team that's now fully mature, ready for the playoffs. Robinson, wasn't a fan of that draft pick anyway. It'd be awkward for him to go to the Grizzlies after John Morant effectively ended his life a couple nights ago with that cross-up. But, Robinson and Landry Shamet. Shamet, obviously bigger name. And I think he's the main sweetener, the main attraction in that pick. I think he'd fit well with Morant. But Robinson's kind of a throw-in. If he works. If it doesn't, which I think is more likely, not that expensive to replace him.
Yeah, so as the NBA trade deadline nears, these are a few of the guys that are most likely to be on the trade block. They're already on the trade block now. Teams are offering things up. Andre Drummond, Andre Iguodala, both they could be very important pieces for teams in the future. Iguodala probably more in the immediate for the teams going after him that are more title contenders. But Drummond could be a solid piece, for a team that is building towards something. So both very important key players in these trades. It's
really, the weird thing for me is Drummond currently as a player is far better and more valuable in most senses than Iguodala. But I feel like because Iguodala's at a premium position, he's going to ultimately get a better trade package.
Yeah, it's just really the way of the league right now.
Trade deadline. It's been pretty dead lately.
Yeah, it's just the way things are right now, just with the market for centers, obviously, plus his contract. And we mentioned this earlier, so we're going to move into it now, talking about the Pistons and their situation with wanting to get rid of Drummond, especially now that Blake Griffin is out for the season after knee surgery. They say he's out indefinitely, but most likely he's out for the season. There'd be no reason for him to come back at the very end. He's a 6-time All-Star who will be 31 years old come March, and he's averaging a career-low 15.5 points per game. He only played 18 games this season, and really injuries have plagued him his whole career. He missed his rookie season with an injury. He missed all 82 games, then was healthy for a while during the Lob City era. In 2016, missed 47 games, 2017, 21 games, 2018, 24 games, and this season, he will most likely miss upwards of 60-plus games. So not great. He only played 70-plus games 4 times in his career. So just your thoughts on this injury, and will Blake Griffin ever be the same?
It's a really rough injury. The whole narrative with Griffin since he started getting hurt again around 2016 was that he relied on athleticism too much to ever be good once he got all those injuries, and he really did prove us wrong last season. He did a phenomenal job. Like, we had that fun little Point Blake thing going for a while. He kind of reinvented himself, and I know I read articles like he was shooting and passing well enough. People like Blake Griffin is going to be here to stay even after the athleticism goes away. But boy, another bad knee injury like this. He's had so many of them, and he's a big enough guy. You have to wonder if even like really simple stuff like shooting, because he's not good enough to be just a spot-up shooter. He's always going to need a bit of quickness, even when he's playing kind of that weird point guard forward hybrid thing he did. It's going to be difficult for me to envision Griffin ever being nearly as effective as he even was last year. We honestly might be lucky if 15.5 points is his average in the next couple seasons. We might be on the lucky end of things there.
Yeah, Griffin was an all-star last season. You pointed it out. He had kind of reinvented himself, recovered, had a solid year. But yeah, the future looks bleak for Blake Griffin and the Pistons. It's not great. They're most likely going to deal Andre Drummond before the trade deadline. With the expiring deal plus the player option, obviously. So things are not looking good for Blake Griffin. Just what do you think overall, just based on not necessarily his time in Detroit, but overall, what will his legacy be if, this is kind of as we start to see a downward trajectory in his career?
Well, first to go on a little quick mini rant about the Pistons. There's very few teams that have been consistently as misinformed with kind of the direction of their franchise. Dating back to the Josh Smith, Greg Monroe, Andre Drummond disaster with the three bigs, and then now the modern Twin Towers, Blake Griffin, Drummond pairing. They've just so consistently picked the wrong schemes and picked the wrong players like Reggie Jackson to represent their franchise. Very few draft picks have stuck around either. Very rough for the Pistons. They're probably going to have to completely retool after these guys are gone. But Griffin's an interesting legacy to think about. When I was looking at all those all-decade teams, I was really surprised to see how many Blake was on. I was like, I really did kind of forget how good of a player Blake Griffin was at his prime. We think about him as a dunker, but he was legitimately an extremely dominant force on offense, and he could do a good amount on defense too. He's got a little Vince Carter to him. Definitely not going to have that long of a career. But Carter was a dunker first and foremost, and then he had some excellent All-Star, All-NBA years. But he didn't have, for as long as Carter's been in the league, he didn't have a super long peak like Griffin has. I think Griffin, as dominant as he was then, as kind of a signature player he is of the era, I do think he's got a pretty safe Hall of Fame case. But I think there always will be a little bit of a letdown. Not for anything Griffin controlled, because he was always phenomenal when he was on the court. But there was a lot of potential that injuries robbed both him and us, the fans, of.
Yeah, just a really unfortunate situation throughout his career a lot. And that was mostly just regular season injuries that we talked about. He had a number of times where injury ended his playoffs, and then obviously that ended the Clippers' run in the playoffs. Last season, he tried to play injured for the Pistons, got swept by the Bucks. So just not just a really unlucky guy when it comes to the injuries, and obviously just the way he played probably didn't help that. And but before we move on, I just want to try and make a parallel and see your thoughts on this. I see extreme similarities in the games of Zion Williamson and Blake Griffin. So is this maybe a warning to Zion Williamson to develop his game more and rely less on his athleticism?
Definitely, actually, because when you were talking about drawing your comparison, my mind didn't go to Zion, it went to Larry Johnson. Fantastic dunker and just offensive superstar, athletic freak for the Hornets and Knicks in the 90s. And who is the number one comparison for Zion? It was Larry Johnson. So, yeah, now that you mentioned that, there is a lot of similarities there. And we hear a lot about them teaching Zion how to block and run right again. And as extreme as that sounds, they're doing their due diligence, trying to find a way to keep their hyper athletic big man from going down to Larry Johnson, who also had an injury-shortened career on Blake Griffin road. And I know Blake isn't done yet, but it is kind of difficult to envision him latching off another team in a major way after so many surgeries and given his current age.
The parallels are beginning to mount. Number 1 overall pick, missed his entire first season because of a lower leg injury. Then will probably win Rookie of the Year, although redshirt Rookie of the Year. I think Zion's probably the favorite to win that next year. And then when you also look, just he can be the face of a franchise that hasn't done a whole lot. He's going to have a great surrounding cast around him to help him grow, but he's going to rely too much on athleticism as Blake Griffin did in his early career. So I think this is something to watch out for. It's strange to take an injury from another player and try and project it onto the entire career of a young 20-year-old, but I think the parallels are very evident, and Zion needs to be careful with what kind of player he is and how he develops.
And that checks out, too, because everything he said about Griffin applies to Johnson. He was the first pick out of UNLV. He had a Rookie of the Year season. He was the Hornets. There's a lot of parallels between all three of them. I think Zion does with the shooting and some of the passing he can do. I think he has some traits that separate him enough from Blake Griffin to keep him from solely being an athleticism player. But the Pelicans drafted Zion for the athlete, not for the... He's shown a lot of good defensive promise. He's shown smart passing ability. He's shown a decent three-ball touch. That's not what he was drafted to do, though. He was drafted to do highlight dunks and get crazy blocks.
You know it. So with that, we're going to move on to our next topic. We had been doing NFL power rankings pretty much the entirety of the NFL regular season. And now that the regular season is winding down and we're more in the playoffs, teams are getting eliminated. Shout out to Ryan Tannehill. We are in the age of Tannehill now. So now it's time to get more into the NBA, a lot more. And so we're going to start doing weekly NBA power rankings.
I'm here for it, man.
Yeah, it's going to be a bit tough because, there's one NFL game a week and one podcast a week, but there's a lot more than one NBA game a week, and we can't record the podcast and put it out right away. And there's, sometimes a day or two delay between recording and release. So we will always let you know when it's being recorded, and you'll see when it gets uploaded. So there's a bit of a delay. I don't know how much that will affect the power rankings most of the time, but that's just a little disclaimer I have to have before we start this. Again, we're recording this Wednesday the 8th in the afternoon. So just if there's some games Wednesday night or even Thursday night before we get this out that can change this up. So with that, let's get right into it. The Toronto Raptors are my number 10 team. With losing Kawhi, a lot of teams thought, or a lot of people even around the league thought, all right, dump Kyle Lowry, build around Pascal Siakam, Fred VanVleet, maybe even tank for a year and try and get another young player. If not, when you get rid of Kyle Lowry, try and get some young pieces. But the Raptors have stayed the course and are fighting. They're going to be a mid-level seed, somewhere between 3 through 6 in the East, most likely. Probably will get to the second round, but they have a ceiling. I mean, Pascal Siakam is their best player, so he's a good young player. You even had him on your early season MVP list before he went down with some injuries. But, this team clearly has a ceiling. Speaking of teams with ceilings, at 9, I've got the Utah Jazz. Mike Conley and Donovan Mitchell have been a deadly pairing. Bogdanovich is a great shooter. And Rudy Gobert, awesome on the inside. But this is what the epitome of a collection of B players. These guys are B pluses. Gobert, you could make an argument, is an A-, but he's not that well-rounded of a center. So, this team has a ceiling, and that's probably the 5 or 6 seed in the West. They could challenge one of those higher-seeded teams and win a round, but they're not making it to the conference finals. They're not making it to the finals. They sold out, and they have a peak. I'm not saying they need to blow things up. They're going to make the playoffs. They're going to be a really good team. They could cause some trouble, but right now I have them at my 9 spot at 24-12. They have a ceiling, and that's all I can say. Speaking of guys and teams that have no ceiling whatsoever, number 8, I have the Dallas Mavericks. Doncic for MVP is the cry we had several weeks ago, and it's what I will continue right now. He is still my MVP favorite. Dude is just putting up ridiculous numbers. You'll pull up the ESPN app and check the stats, the box scores, if you do like I do, and you'll see, you're getting used to seeing, 32 points, 11 rebounds, 7 assists. He's putting up ridiculous LeBron-esque numbers, Wilt Chamberlain-esque numbers, ridiculous stuff. Clearly the front runner for the MVP for me. And then, just obviously he's got a solid supporting cast. Tim Hardaway Jr., Kristaps Porzingis, Seth Curry, a number of guys around him, and obviously Maxi Kleber, and they could trade for Andre Drummond to get another big in there. So a lot of potential for Dallas to keep growing. Speaking of the other team with one of the MVP frontrunners at 7, I have the Rockets, the Houston Rockets, Harden and Westbrook. They're working it out. They're trying to find this balance. Mike D'Antoni, in the final year of his contract, there's some uncertainty there, so that could be looming over the team. But Harden averaging, 38.4 points per game. That's ridiculous. He's leading the league in that category by 8 points. The next guy is Giannis, who's averaging 30, which is ridiculous in its own right. So just the amount of scoring he's been doing. It would be the most points per game scored by a player since Wilt Chamberlain in 1963. So, I mean, that just shows you the historic clip that that Harden's scoring at. Westbrook is a solid player, but they still need to figure out what kind of team they are and how they're supposed to play. 6, I have the Denver Nuggets. It's Nikola Jokic and a bunch of guys. You know, I know you've got a lot of talent, Gary Harris, Jamal Murray, Paul Millsap, but I think you got to start packaging guys together. You know, they're going 9-10 deep on the depth chart with solid players, Malik Beasley, Will Barton. They have to start packaging guys together and getting Jokic some help, some star power, because you're not going to get that in free agency with Denver. So you got to, as much as it hurts to break up a team that probably, along with Miami and Boston, has the best chemistry in the league, they have to make some moves if they want to move up into that upper echelon. Speaking of teams that need to make some moves, maybe to move up into the upper echelon, the Miami Heat, I have at 5. They've got some of the best stories in the NBA. Kendrick Nunn, Tyler Hero, Duncan Robinson. Some solid chemistry, great coach in Eric Spoelstra, but they have a clear ceiling. They're going to need more stars at some point, but we'll have to see, do these guys have trade value? Can they make moves? Do they even want to make moves? Does Pat Riley think this team can legitimately make it out of the East? It's yet to be seen. We'll have to see how far he's letting Eric Spoelstra and this ragtag group of players go. 4, I have the Clippers. Not the start they wanted. PG obviously didn't play for the first few weeks. Kawhi and PG have been sitting quite a lot. Montrezl Harrell and Lou Williams, the best bench combo probably of all time. These guys are ridiculous. The Clippers, I think they lack chemistry and they're not at full strength yet. So we'll see maybe after the All-Star break when the season gets a little more serious, if they really ramp things up. They gave up 120 plus points to the Knicks the other night. They're not necessarily taking things as seriously as they need to right now, but they'll be fine. They'll be a 2, 3, 4 seed in the West. They'll get into the playoffs, and then we will see the true Clippers. They're not going to be a regular season team this year. 3, I have the Boston Celtics. They're 8-2 in their last 10 games. That's tied with the Bucks for best in the league. They're first in points allowed at 103.5 points per game. They got 5 guys in double figures. So with Boston, it's not necessarily by committee, but it's more that the threat can come from anywhere. Any night, Jaylen Brown, Gordon Hayward, Kemba Walker, Jason Tatum can go for 25 points. You never know who can hurt you, and they're so hard to guard because people talk about their center position as a huge weakness, and it is, and it will be in the playoffs, especially against Giannis, Joel Embiid. But right now in the regular season, when they put out 5 guys that can guard any position, they're very deadly. So I've got the Celtics at 3. At 2, I've got the Lakers. Davis just went down with a back injury the other night, so it'll be yet to see. We'll see how severe that injury is. That could drop them in the power rankings, especially playing without Davis. But both LeBron and Anthony Davis top 12 in points. LeBron leads the league in assists, and they're second in point differential. So when this Lakers team is at full strength and they're playing to the best of their ability, they can be one of the best teams in the league. And then finally, at the top of the power rankings, number 1, the Milwaukee Bucks. Giannis is second in points and 6th in assists. Probably in that top 3, top 5 for MVP to repeat. He's second. The team is second in points per game and first in rebounds per game. And they have the highest point differential in the league at 12 points. Milwaukee, they're the clear number 1 team, but I don't know how dominant of a number 1 they are. This top is very close between these teams up here. So that is my top 10 power rankings for this week. Will, your thoughts on it?
I'll go down the list, hit a couple teams. So try to get a brief blurb about everything, but make kind of rapid fire. Raptors, absolutely right. Pascal Siakam is obviously a star, and the Raptors probably one of the best talent factories in the league. As Chris Boucher is a really, really solid potential future starter for them. Utah Jazz, Mike Conley, he's been out for a bit. This transition with him hasn't been as seamless as they hoped, but with Ingles picking up his game a lot, the Jazz have some hope they could just be such a solid Spurs type unit. They could contend well. Mavericks, love Doncic. When Dirk retired, I sobbed, Marco. It's pretty emotional for me. It was a rough time for the whole city to see the star who carried us for so long go down. I really wondered if Doncic would be the guy who could pick up that torch, run with it. So far, he absolutely has. Absolutely amazing player. Rockets, I don't love their ceiling, honestly. I think Harden and Westbrook are still kind of a time bomb, and I think they're still missing quite a few pieces. Denver Nuggets, love your caption, Jokic and a bunch of guys. Michael Porter Jr., Jamal Murray, Gary Harris. We keep waiting for these guys to be the stars that they flash potential to be. It's not happening so far. I think they're young enough. We can take another season with them, see how it goes. But I think at the end of this year, if Murray and Harris and Porter can't start stepping up to make this a more championship contend-worthy team, I think it's time to start thinking about some trades. The Heat, you do have to wonder how far they can actually go in the playoffs, but love Nunn and Hero and Duncan Robinson. Quick shout out to Bam Adebayo, looks like a legitimate all-star. Clippers they're concerning me. Load management and injuries have really led to that lack of chemistry, which I think is pretty dangerous for them going forward. Celtics, I'm really starting to like Hayward. Hayward's had an amazing bounce-back season within a bounce-back season, as he's terrible injury luck there. I'm glad to see him coming back. Tatum has been great. Jaylen Brown, I think, is honestly pretty close to, if not already surpassing, Jason Tatum. And, of course, Walker has been everything they've wanted him to be. Lakers is going to be interesting to see what they can do without Anthony Davis. I think without him, their ceiling's pretty low. And then, of course, Bucks. Really, really love the Bucks, actually. And I've heard, to go back to a trade, I've heard Bogdan Bogdanovic from the Kings wants a new deal, doesn't like his role there. I've heard him linked to Mavericks and Bucks. So both those teams could add more firepower. So it's going to be interesting if Milwaukee tries to add like a Bogdanovic to get some more points there. But,
yeah, so a solid first power rankings, I think. A lot better than the first NFL ones. I think we're getting a better grasp on where everyone's at and how everything is going. So, yeah, we're going to continue those NBA power rankings, hopefully every single week throughout the regular season, just to give you a better picture of who is where amongst those top teams in the NBA. So we'll give that a look every single week almost to keep you updated. All right, Will, that is it for
rankings. I don't see it changing much from here. I think these 10 teams are about it for me, actually.
All right. Well, with that, Will, that is it for your portion of the podcast. So say goodbye to the audience.
Hey, good to talk to all you guys again. Looking forward to being back on Lincoln with the rest of the crew soon.
All right. So now we're going to welcome in Mr. Jared DeHaan to the podcast. Jared, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you, Marco?
We're doing just fine. So now Jared is our resident college basketball expert. So we're just going to let him go here, let him loose. Let him talk about all things college basketball. Jared, what's on your mind about this season as a whole so far?
This season has been really interesting in college basketball. I mean, before the start of the new year, before 2020 even started, 5 number 1 teams have already lost this year. I mean, you go with Kansas, Duke, just all of them have had really good games, but then they've had just 1 or 2 games where they've just played terrible or just subpar. And I think what it comes down to is last year, the freshman recruiting class was insanely strong at the top end. So those blue bloods, all those top teams had some insanely good freshmen that played tremendous last year. Now this season, the freshman class was good, but it was not near as top heavy. There was a lot more just like a few 5-stars, but a lot of 4-star recruits that wouldn't come in and play great to start out with. They had to adjust to college basketball. They're coming high school. They aren't insane 5-star recruits. So they've had some time to adjust. And I think these next few weeks is when we're really going to see what teams are going to separate themselves to be top 5, top 10 teams. Because these recruits are finally getting some playing time under them. They're finally getting adjusted to everything that college basketball has thrown at them, to the three-point line, to the restricted area in the paint. I just think that before February starts, we'll really see who's going to be the top 3 or 4 seeds in the NCAA tournament.
All right, so speaking of just those top seeds and who could be the most dominant teams this season, Can you just give me a quick short list of your title contenders? Anybody you think has a reasonable or a large chance at winning the title?
So first I'm going to start with two easy ones that come right off the top of my head, and that's Kansas and Gonzaga. I mean, Kansas and Gonzaga, I think, are ranked first and third respectively right now. Gonzaga has shown some real promise, but the last two games they've had in the West Coast Conference, they trailed Portland by 7.5, came back to win by 13, and then Gonzaga just beat Pepperdine by 5 at home. So Gonzaga's had a little bit of trouble, but with Tilly, Cheney, with Norvell, they have some great players. So I think they have a real shot at being the number one seed this year if they can take care of the rest of the teams in the West Coast Conference. Kansas, I mean, Azubuike is insanely talented. He's finally getting some time where he's not injured. Kansas has a great shot this year. And, of course, the next team I have is Duke. So Duke had that messed up against Stephen F. Austin. That's where everybody said maybe Duke isn't as good as we all thought they were. But recently, they took care of business at Miami, beat them by 20-plus. They finally got the ball rolling. Burden Carey is insane. He's not Zion Williamson quality, but he's a great freshman to have. Next is Baylor. Baylor started off the year pretty strong. Then they lost the game. We're like, maybe they aren't going to be that top seed, second seed, third seed. But recently, they have been playing outstanding. They're showing us why they could be a number one seed come into the tournament. Next team is the surprise team from the Big East in Butler. Butler has made me think twice about, because I thought they'd be a 5-6 seed come NCAA tournament, but they have taken care of business. They're going to challenge Villanova for that Big East Conference. And my last team I have is currently undefeated San Diego State, my mid-major pick. They're still undefeated. They took care of business at Utah State when I predicted they would lose. I could see them easily going 16-2, 17-1 in the Mountain West and being a top 1 or 2 seed come NCAA tournament time.
Well, Jared, I think those are all really interesting title contenders from those teams, as you mentioned, that are the obvious teams, the most clear title contenders in Kansas, Gonzaga, Duke. Obviously, still a strong team in Baylor, and a couple mid-majors at Butler and San Diego State that I think, as you brought up, they are very solid teams and should be taken seriously. So is there anything else you want to tell us about your thoughts on this college basketball season so far?
I'm just going to, my one thing I'm going to point out is just going to focus on the Big Ten this year and how it could easily get 10 to 11 teams in the NCAA tournament. The only 3 I wouldn't have in right now is Purdue, unfortunately Nebraska, and Northwestern. But the other 11 have a serious shot at making the NCAA tournament, and I believe Big Ten is by far the best conference in basketball this season.
Well, that's a pretty dominant picture to paint. Obviously, you look nationwide, only 68 teams getting in. So your thought that 10, maybe even 11 teams can be getting in from the Big Ten, that says a lot coming from our resident college basketball expert. All right, so that is it for Jared's part in this podcast. Jared, thank you so much for coming in, and we will see you next week, right?
Yep, see you next week. Thanks for having me.
And now we're going to welcome in Paul Hires to the podcast.
How's it going? We're all back for this episode, so it should be a fun one.
All right, so with that, we're going to move into our national championship preview for the college football playoffs. So first up, Paul, I want to take a look at this QB matchup. Obviously, on one side, we've got Heisman Trophy winner Joe Burrow, who's having one of the greatest statistical seasons a quarterback has ever had in college football. On the other end, Trevor Lawrence and Clemson. He struggled a lot at the beginning of the year, but Clemson has been really dominant. But I feel like people aren't noticing just because of the quality of opponents they've been facing. People aren't really paying attention to Trevor Lawrence and Clemson. They played really well against Ohio State, got people's attention. But your thoughts on this QB matchup?
Yeah, I mean, you said it. Joe Burrow, the Heisman clear favorite. And, I mean, we all knew he was going to be the Heisman. It was pretty obvious. But you can't forget that Lawrence hasn't lost a game. And, once again, the competition hasn't been there, but I think that's huge. And just that he hasn't lost a game. And there's only been a couple of close games this season. So when I look at the stats, Burrow's actually had 100 or so more passing attempts. And that could just be because Lawrence has come out in the later stages of the game because of, them being up by so much. But once again, Burrow with about 1,800 more yards, almost 20 more touchdowns, and still 2 less interceptions. The stats are really on Burrow's side. But once again, that could be just because Lawrence isn't in the game as much in the later stages.
Yeah, and I think people also have to keep in mind that Joe Burrow is older than Lamar Jackson. Of course, he had the redshirt year at Ohio State and a few years there after that. Then this is also his second year at LSU. And looking back last year, there was a 4-game stretch last season where Joe Burrow did not throw a touchdown pass. He was really inaccurate last season, which is very much the opposite of how he's done this year, obviously throwing for the record completion percentage at 78%. But Joe Burrow has taken a long time to mature as a quarterback. And Trevor Lawrence, obviously, as we said, started as a true freshman, playing in here now his second season as the starting quarterback for Clemson, has yet to lose a game. This could be his first loss ever. So I think Joe Burrow, of course, is the better quarterback, better situationally, more experience. But Trevor Lawrence, he's just so much younger. He's got so much more to learn. Although I think Joe Burrow is the better quarterback. So now kind of looking at the other side, obviously both teams, pretty solid offensive lines and weapons galore at wide receiver, running back, tight end. Wherever these guys need to throw the ball or hand off to, they will be fine. But looking at the defense, Paul, who do you think has the advantage on the defensive side of the ball?
Well, first off, Clemson, I'm just looking at their numbers. 10 points allowed per game. I mean, that is very good. I don't know if that's the best in the country, but that is very good. But once again, you got to take a look at the competition. LSU's given up about 3 touchdowns a game. That's gone down as the season's progressed. Once again, they've played better teams, and you got to take into consideration their last 3 games. They only gave up 7 against Texas A&M, 10 against a top 10 Georgia team, and then 28 against Oklahoma in the semifinal. And we know how good Oklahoma's offense has been this season. I think if you just look at the numbers, Clemson has been the clear better team. But if you consider who they're playing, it's pretty even. I'd still give a little bit of advantage to Clemson, but LSU has really gotten a lot better over the last 3 or 4 weeks. I just can't get over the fact they give up 37 to Ole Miss. So I'd probably give it to Clemson at this point, but right now I'd say it's going to be very even on the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah, you kind of hit the nail on the head right there. The difference between just looking at the pure numbers and then applying those numbers into a context, you get 2 very different stories when you do those 2 separate things. In my opinion, just looking at everything overall, I prefer putting those numbers into context, looking at the season overall, who they've played. I think LSU has a better defense. You mentioned that Ole Miss game. That defense is the second, third string defense later in the stages of the game. A lot of those are garbage time points that LSU's been giving up. So I think LSU is the better team overall. But looking at this Clemson team, they've been here. This is their 5th straight season in the college football playoffs. That means these seniors, even the redshirt seniors, they have had every single season they've been at Clemson, they've been in the playoffs, been a national title contender. Do you think that playoff experience gives the Tigers any sort of edge coming into the national title game?
I think it does, and I think that could have been one of the reasons why they won that game against Ohio State. And I've been hearing reports that was actually the best semifinal game in college football playoff history to this point, which wouldn't be saying a lot since, once again, there's only been, 6 years of the playoff. But I do think that does give them an edge. I think they've been here before. They know how it feels. LSU, on the other hand, it's like a first-year experience. I don't think it'll have a huge effect on the game, but I do think it'll make a difference.
Yeah, so obviously there's a lot of things going on in this national title game picture, a lot of storylines, whether you look at the high-profile quarterbacks, Joe Burrow, the presumptive number 1 overall pick, obviously, Ed Orgeron's meteoric rise at LSU, Dabo Swinney continuing the dominance that Clemson has had for the better part of the last decade. So a lot going on there. We'll get into our picks for the college football playoff later on in the pick'ems. Speaking of which, let's move on to everyone's favorite mini segment, Just the Numbers with Paul Hires.
So once again, a little shakeup in the standings. Up in the top 3. We'll get to that in a second. But Marco, you and Jared picked the exact same teams last week. I don't know if you knew that or not, but didn't really work out for you as you both went 1 for 4 in the NFL games, the playoff games. So you're still in last, 46 and 37. Jared at 47 and 36, so still a 1-game difference there. But Will got everyone. He picked the Texans to beat the Bills, and that was the reason pretty much why he went up back to the top. So I slide back down to third at 54 and 29. Tim down to second with 47 and 24 now. And Will, with the only winning record last week's pick'ems, up to 52 and 26. And here's this for you. He's gone 30 and 10 in the last 7 weeks. And of our last 15 college football games that we've picked, he has gone 13 and 2. And if he were here, he'd probably say something like "in fuego" or something to that matter. But that's pretty much the reason why he's gotten himself into first. Once again, pretty much less than 0.5% difference between Will and Tim. So it just keeps going back and forth between those two. Moving forward, we were 10 and 15 last week, just not very good at all, and that is credited to, once again, Will picking, the only one picking the Texans, everyone picking the Patriots except for Tim. Shout out to Tim for calling that back in episode 13, his hot take, the Patriots going out in the first round of the playoffs. He has gone 40 and 15 in the last 10 weeks, 22 and 8 in the last 6 weeks. And then obviously everyone picking the Saints did not help that cause either. The clean sweep curse is back, the double whammy and the Dahan curse, getting everyone on that one. Clean sweeps are now 24 and 7 overall, which is 77%. So that could be coming back down. We'll have to watch out.
All right, so yeah, you discussed it. The main thing I take away from that is that has to be probably one of our worst weeks of pick'ems as a whole. So hopefully this week is better. So let's move into this week's picks. First up, we're going to do all of the divisional matchups in the NFL. So the first one, number 6 seeded, the Minnesota Vikings at the number 1 seed, San Francisco 49ers, Saturday, 3:30 on NBC. Tim's pick is the 49ers. Paul, who do you have in this one?
Well, as I mentioned, no one picked the Vikings last week. And so this is kind of an unexpected matchup. I wasn't thinking this would actually happen. But that being said, once again, Vikings really no signature wins. They did beat the Saints, took them to overtime, but guess what? The 49ers beat them without overtime. In the same location. Also, the other common opponents in this one, the 49ers lost to the Falcons, who the Vikings actually beat. But the big one for me is the 49ers destroyed the Green Bay Packers. And that game is still in my memory as just an all. I mean, it was completely dominated by San Francisco in all 4 quarters, and Minnesota hasn't been able to beat Green Bay in their 2 attempts they had this year, and that's just so overwhelming. I just feel like they're just not even on the same level as San Francisco. The fact that they can't even beat Green Bay, let alone destroy them like the 49ers did. And so for that reason, with the 49ers just dominant defense this season, I have to go with San Francisco on this one.
All right, so Jared DeHaan is going to also pick the San Francisco 49ers. So will Will Byerman. So all 4 of you guys picking the 49ers. And guess what? It's going to be a double whammy. We're going to have a DeHaan curse and a clean sweep, as I am also going to pick the San Francisco 49ers. I championed the Vikings all season. I picked them a lot in our pick'ems. They burned me quite a few times. And I finally got fed up with them. I said, you know what? Drew Brees and the Saints, they're going to handle their business. And they did not. But I have to believe that the 49ers have a much better defense than the Saints do. Kirk Cousins is going to get flustered. Jimmy G should handle this Vikings defense pretty well. He's got a lot of weapons around him. Best tight end in the league, George Kittle. A lot of gadget wide receiver plays with Deebo Samuel. It's running back by committee back there with Matt Breida and Tevin Coleman and a bunch of other guys, really talented guys. So I'm going to pick the 49ers. Hesitantly, the Vikings are playing really good right now, but I have to go with San Francisco. So moving on to the other 6-seed, 1-seed matchup in the AFC, it's the Tennessee Titans at the Baltimore Ravens, Saturday, 7:15 on CBS. Tim's pick is the Baltimore Ravens. Paul, who do you have in this one?
Well, once again, as I said last week, hats off to the Tennessee Titans and Coach Vrabel for just winning their last, few games in the regular season to get themselves into the playoffs, and then knocking off the New England Patriots. I mean, it's got to feel good to be the ones to say you potentially ended the New England dynasty, if that's what you call it. But I think their road ends here. I think the Ravens have looked very good at home this year. Only 1 loss at home. Only 2 losses overall. I mean, this Ravens team we've talked about has been at the top of of our power rankings for about almost 10 weeks now. And sure, the Titans beat the Patriots, but that game was close for about 7/8 of the game. They really only pulled away there at the end. If you remember, I got to bring it up. If you remember the Ravens against the Patriots, that was only close for about a half or so. And once again, 37-20, they beat the Patriots. I just don't see the Titans doing much in this game. And once again, sure, they're on the Patriots level, but they're not on the Ravens level of competition right now. I'd expect it to be close in the first quarter. After that, I think the Ravens take it away.
Yeah, so Jared is going to have to agree with you on that one. He's got the Baltimore Ravens. Will also is picking the Baltimore Ravens in this matchup. So that leaves it to me. I also picked the Baltimore Ravens. That means, yes, we have a second double whammy, another clean sweep, double whammy, a DeHaan curse, and a clean sweep. Double whammy. It's not looking good for us. Definitely go put money on both the Titans and the Vikings. It's not a good look. We don't have a stat for our double whammies, but it's not good. I
will get that written up for you next week.
Yeah, next week. Hopefully, it's better now if the Ravens and 49ers can win. Yeah, you brought up kind of all the points I was going to say. Just Baltimore has been extremely dominant this season, rarely challenged by anyone past week 5 or so when they really hit their rhythm this season. Lamar Jackson, presumptive MVP, playing very dominant football. He's facing a very hard-nosed, tough defense in the Titans. And on the other side of the ball, obviously Ryan Tannehill, since he was named the starter in Week 7, has had an intense swagger to this Tennessee team. Derrick Henry's a bowling ball, but it'll be left to see. Obviously, no Delaney Walker at the tight end position, but can those wide receivers step up against this vaunted secondary of Baltimore, just loaded with guys? Anthony Averett, Marlon Humphrey, Marcus Peters, a bunch of guys in that secondary, and of course that very solid pass rush that Baltimore has. Tannehill's got to watch out. So I've got the Ravens in this one pretty handily. I'll say they probably win by 2 touchdowns. The Houston Texans at the Kansas City Chiefs is our next matchup. The Texans barely surviving against the Bills. They're the 4 seed. KC stealing that bye on the final week of the season. They're the 2 seed. They play Sunday at 2 o'clock on CBS. Tim has the Chiefs in this one. Paul, who do you have?
So I know the Texans won this game earlier this season, and it was at Arrowhead, but the Chiefs have come on strong since then. They have won their last 6 straight, and they haven't lost at home since the Packers came to town. I think this Chiefs defense has improved steadily over the last few games, and I think they've been just that much better. The Texans have been inconsistent. Give them credit. Deshaun Watson, J.J. Watt, give them credit for that 3-point win in overtime over the Buffalo Bills. But I think their offense is going to have to do a lot better in this game if they want to keep up. I know the Chiefs' defense is probably not as good as the Bills' defense, but it's keeping up with that Kansas City offense is what I'm getting at. And this is a stat I've taken a look at over this matchup. The Chiefs have, in this season, have gone 12-1 when they've given up less than 31 points. That stat is unreal. That means they're scoring at an unreal rate. And if the Texans want to have a chance in this one, they're going to have to put up some points. I got to go with the Chiefs. I think Patrick Mahomes, Kelsey, Hill, and all those backs in the backfield for Kansas City are going to get it done, and it's going to be too much for the Texans.
All right, so Jared is going to have to agree with you on that one. He's also picking the Kansas City Chiefs. And once again, Will also agreeing with everyone else, picking the Kansas City Chiefs. So, you know what that means? We've had 2 double whammies. Double whammy. And everyone has picked the Chiefs in this one. And I just could not bring myself, one, to have 3 double whammies in one episode. And also, there's just something about the Texans and Deshaun Watson and the way J.J. Watt got that defense together. I feel like I'm really stretching for a storyline here. I feel like I'm really stretching to make this pick. But there's something is telling me to pick the Texans. I just feel like they can really push around that pretty weak Chiefs defense. And I don't know. I feel like the Texans, it's finally their time. The Patriots are out of the way. It's their time to maybe try and make a run at this AFC title. And I feel like they have a chance at beating the Chiefs in Arrowhead. That's saying a lot. But I just have to go with the Texans on this one. All right, so our next matchup is the final divisional game. The 5 seed Seattle Seahawks at the 2 seed Green Bay Packers in the NFC, Sunday, 5:45 on Fox. Tim's pick, he's got to go with his Packers. Go, Pack, go, he says. Paul, who do you have in this one?
Well, this one, it's drawn up as an ultimate classic. You've got Rodgers, you've got Wilson, and it's in Lambeau. This is going to be fun. I can just feel this is going to be a really close game down to the wire. But once again, I got to take a look at their trend. I know the popular pick is to just pick Seattle in the upset. The Packers have been struggling. They haven't really played that great of teams. They have won 5 straight, but the Giants, the Redskins, and then 3 divisional opponents, not much to talk about there, and they didn't really blow them out either. So I can see the reasoning But you look at the Seahawks' last 5 games, and I just keep coming back to this. They lost 3 of them, and 2 of them were by double digits to the Rams and the Cardinals. Then that very close loss at home against the 49ers. And their 2 wins, a struggle win against Carolina, and then last week against the Eagles. And everyone seems to think they pretty much dominated that game, but quite honestly, they didn't. I mean, if it weren't for that touchdown to Metcalf there towards the end, it would have been a 1-point game. And you're going up against a struggling Eagles team they were playing well, but they were playing in the NFC East. They had a backup quarterback, so many injuries, and they still were that close to losing to them. I just don't see them coming in here with much momentum, but I do think that it is a close game, and I think this could be anywhere from a 1-point game to a 2-touchdown deficit, but I do think the Packers will win it. They've just got that clutch factor with Aaron Rodgers, and something about them in the playoffs. They seem to get the job done. I have the Packers advancing to the NFC Championship.
So for the first time in this episode, Jared is going to have to disagree, I should say, with you and Tim. He's going to go with Seattle in this one. Will continue his trend of agreeing with every single one of Jared's picks. He's going to be picking the Seattle Seahawks as well. And I am also going to have to agree with those guys. I'm picking Seattle. The last time Seattle, and this is crazy to think about, the last time Seattle made it to the conference championship game in the NFC was the 2014 playoffs, right? So January 18th, 2015 was an overtime win in the NFC championship game against the Green Bay Packers. In overtime, they got the onside kick. It was a crazy game. Ultimately went on to lose to the Patriots in the Super Bowl. But just to think how dominant the Seahawks have been throughout the better part of this decade, and yet they have not made it to the NFC Championship game in now 5 years. So I think it is time for them to return. I believe they can take down the Packers. Aaron Rodgers is 20th in QBR this season. Russell Wilson is 4th. I think the Seahawks are riddled with injuries, but I think Marshawn Lynch coming back will give them a spark. I think this defense is hard-nosed, is tough, and I think they can handle the cold and possible snow in Lambeau, and they can take down the Packers. So now our final pick'em of the episode. It's, well, not the granddaddy of them all, but it's the biggest game of the year in college football. It's the national championship game, number 1 LSU, number 3 Clemson, Monday, 7 o'clock on ESPN. Tim has the LSU Tigers. Paul, who do you have in this final matchup of the college football season?
Yeah, so we touched about it a little bit earlier on with the quarterbacks and just how it's really even on the defensive side of the ball. But once again, I think it comes down to the level of competition, and LSU hasn't had the best schedule, believe it or not. I mean, Northwestern State, Georgia Southern, Vanderbilt, Utah State, Arkansas at home. I mean, there's a few cupcakes sprinkled in there, but for the majority, they have played very good teams. You've got Auburn, you've got Alabama. They blew out Georgia in the SEC championship, took care of Oklahoma, as we saw, setting records for most touchdown passes. I mean, this offense is electric. They've only gotten better since that Auburn game. And I just think that they're just going to continue to put up numbers. I think Clemson's experience in the playoff, in the championship, will help them out here. But I think the LSU Tigers pull away from the Clemson Tigers in the second half, and I have to go with LSU as your national champions.
Well, Jared is going to have to agree with you on this one. He's going to pick the LSU Tigers, and Will, despite going with Clemson to beat Ohio State, he's not sticking with the Clemson Tigers. This time he's going with LSU. Will also picking the LSU Tigers. And here we go again. This is not a double whammy because Jared does not have a curse in college football. That's only the Dahan NFL curse, but it is a clean sweep. I am picking the LSU Tigers to win the college football national championship. All of us picking LSU. We could look pretty stupid here in about a week, but that dominant performance against Oklahoma, and as you touched on it, Paul, just overall, just an extremely dominant season of football from them. I think it's going to come to a point here in the national championship game where they're really going to put on a show and probably beat Clemson by a few touchdowns. I think they're going to, I wouldn't say they'll dominate, but I think we're going to see an all-time performance from Joe Burrow and the LSU Tigers. So with that is it for Pick'ems, and we're going to say goodbye to Paul on this episode. Paul, thank you so much for calling in and being part of the podcast.
You're welcome, and we'll be back in studio next week. That sounds exciting.
Yeah, all right. Well, that is it for episode 17 of the Unqualified Opinion Sports Podcast. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave your own unqualified opinions in the comments section down below. Also, don't forget to check us out on Spotify. The link is in the description. So thank you so much for watching, and we will see you all next week.
Double whammy.